Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm so excited to welcome Jacob Krueger to the podcast. Jake is an award-winning screenwriter, playwright, producer, and director, as well as the founder of Jacob Krueger Studio. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you so much for having me, Ali.
I wanted to start, Jake, by asking you about your background in screenwriting. So, did you always know you wanted to be a screenwriter? And then what did you go to school for with screenwriting?
So I had such a crazy journey. I actually went to school for government. I was interested in politics and particularly in political speech writing. And I realized at some point that if I did that, I was going to have to write speeches for people I didn't believe in. And there were some other factors. So I kind of hit this point early in my college career where I realized, okay, I know what I don't want to do, but I don't know what I do. And honestly, I thought I was probably law school bound. And I ended up falling in love with a costume designer. And she was really the person who cracked me open and showed me that I could be an artist. And that was not something that I was aware of in myself prior to that. And our junior year, we were starting to talk about like, what was life going to look like after school? And she really wanted to go to LA to do costume design. And I really wanted to go to New York to direct theater. And we agreed that I would take an internship in Los Angeles. And if I liked it or could tolerate it, we would move to Los Angeles after college. And if I hated it, then she would come with me to New York. And I accidentally sold a script as an intern. And so, and when I say sold, it's kind of a joke because my payment, I got paid a Walkman. He sent me a Walkman, with the tape. But I was like so excited because I sold a movie, and but when I graduated, which is funny, she actually ended up in theater school, and we didn't stay together. And I ended up in Los Angeles, and he created a job for me that doesn't really exist in the industry. And basically, I was an in-house writer, and he would knock on my door, and he would say, "Hey, Jake, I want to make a movie about Sacagawea," and I would figure out the story. I'd write a treatment. We'd sell it. They'd put me in a room. They would hire usually a professional writer, someone with real credits to write the script. That person, sometimes they get the script great, but often they'd mess it up. And then they'd end up back in my office, and it was my job to fix it so that we didn't have to fire them. And sometimes that was literally dictating the script to them, but in the best situations, that was talking to them about their script. And this is really where I learned to teach, because I was so young. I was like, at the beginning, I was like 20 years old, 21 years old, 22 years old. And, when you're 22 years old and you are looking across the room at a professional writer, sometimes an Emmy Award winner, sometimes an Academy Award winner, who is about to get fired, because they did a crappy job on a script. And often it was because they didn't ever feel connected to the script. They took it because they needed the money. They were on the downside of their career. That's why they were working with a small company and not Warner Brothers, And so what would happen would be, I learned that even a writer who thinks they're selling out, you can't write 100 pages without leaving some piece of yourself in there. And in my role, if I were to say, "Hey, do this," they were going to look at me like, "Screw you, kid." But if I could just identify, I call them me droppings, those little drops of them that had made their way onto the script, you could harness their passion again. And it didn't really matter how jaded they were. Once you showed them that they had something in it, right? And once you showed them that you understood what they, maybe not even consciously, but subconsciously were doing, they would get excited. And almost all of those scripts, we were able to salvage and not have to fire the writer. I lost one writer in my time there. And, then I was fortunate enough to get a break and be able to write the Matthew Shepard story. And, that really launched my career as a screenwriter. And so it was a big transition from being on the producing side I was doing a lot of ghost writing, but I was doing all my writing uncredited. So it was very exciting to get to work on the screenwriting side. And because I had success so young, I hit my midlife crisis at 30. And I realized that I was writing for money, and I was very good at it. I was very good at making people happy. But I realized I wasn't really functioning as an artist. And I realized that my ambition, because I've always been a very competitive, very ambitious person, and my ambition was really getting in the way of my art, because I had a hard time saying no to a project that was good for my career. I had a hard time saying, I'm going to focus my time on the piece that I want to write, as opposed to on the piece that this person wants from me, and or what my agent wants me to do. And so for my 30th birthday, I gave myself a gift. I gave myself a stupid amount of money to produce a play and direct a play. And I took about 6 months off from writing, and I just produced this and directed this piece that I'd always wanted to do. It's based on a play called The Sound of a Voice by David Henry Hwang, but we did an expanded version with dance and cool stuff. And the only mistake I made was I thought it was going to suck, so I only ran it for 2 weekends. But it actually came out really beautiful, and I was happy. And that's actually what led me to move to New York. And I worked for a couple of years directing and producing theater. And along that way, I stumbled into teaching and just fell in love with it, and realized, actually, even though I thought my journey was to find my way back to theater, my real journey was to find my way to teaching. And I'm very fortunate in that that's what I get to do every day now. And that's really where my passion lies.
That's wonderful. Such a wonderful, fascinating journey. I love all that. And so then I wanted to ask you as well, how did you go about founding Jacob Krueger Studio? I know it was founded in September 2005. So where do you even start with all of that?
This is how it all started. So when I first moved to New York, I had been saving for years, and I promised myself, I always believe when you're not happy, save money. Because you want to be able to say F you and go do what you want. And so I had been saving for years, not knowing exactly what I was going to do, but knowing I was going to do something different. And so I came to New York, and I promised myself when my bank account hit a certain number that I was going to have to get a job. And fortunately, I had saved enough that I was able to live for 2 years before my bank account hit that number. But then it did. It hit that number. And literally the next day, I got a call from a really crappy writing school. They were lovely. But they were basically like, look, you want to teach for us? The money sucks, but it's a lot of fun. And I thought, well, I haven't made $1 because I've been doing theater for 2 years. So I mostly just spent money. I haven't made $1 in 2 years. A minimum wage sounds awesome. And why not? Why not? I promised myself I was going to get a job. So it was funny because I really had no ambition to teach, but it seemed like, why not? And I always say, like, life is kind of like a movie. I got humbled. When I was working out in Los Angeles, I was making plenty of money. Money was never an issue. And honestly, if someone had called me with that same phone call at the height of my career in Los Angeles, I probably would have been like, no, I'm busy. But you work in theater for a couple of years, and your income changes greatly, but you're doing what matters to you, which I highly recommend. But it humbled me enough that I was open to new possibilities that I might not have been open to before. And so I go to teach that class, and my first class, like I said, I realized I'm going to do this the rest of my life. It was one of those. I've had a couple of moments like that where it is like the universe is speaking directly to you and going, this is what you need to do. And so I was like, okay. So I went to the guy who ran that school, who was a lovely, lovely guy. And I said, look, I want to do this for the rest of my life. I need to make a living wage. And, I don't need a lot of money, but how about, I have a lot more credits than most of your teachers. How about we do like a high-end program, and you charge more, and you pay me a living wage, and and I'll build it for you. And he said, Jake, that's just not really what we do, but I have a friend over at NYU. Why don't I refer you over there? So great. So I got hired by NYU. We went through a long process where we negotiated who owned 7X structure, because that was always my way of teaching. We came to an agreement about it. We scheduled 4 classes, and then they canceled 4 classes. And then we scheduled another 4 classes, and then they canceled another 4 classes. And I realized, okay, this is not going to work this way. Not for me. That's not a level of instability that I'm comfortable with. And so I taught my first class myself in my living room. I had 2 students that I'd somehow found, I don't even remember how. And then I had 3 writer friends who were sitting in on the class. And those 2 students had like the ride of their life because they were in the room with all these professional writers. And it actually grew from those 2 students and word of mouth. And I remember I used to rent at the basement of the Algonquin Theater, and it was like $15 an hour. And I remember thinking, man, I'm never going to make this money back. There's no way. It was like that. It was that tight, but it grew over time. Eventually I was able to start hosting classes. I rented an art studio in Williamsburg. It was a 15 by 15 room with no windows. And we had an elevator that said, do not take this elevator on the weekend. No one will come get you. And, like that's where it started. And then, we were incredibly lucky. I got incredible word of mouth. And, you came actually to the school like right around the point where we're starting to grow when you first joined us, where suddenly we were getting students that I had never talked to on the phone, that I didn't even know where they came from, right? There's suddenly the word of mouth was that strong. And I was very fortunate, and I got to meet some other wonderful teachers because I kind of reached a point where I physically just couldn't handle the number of students that we had. I could teach a group class with them, but when it came to giving them one-on-one feedback, my schedule just couldn't fill the amount of demand. And so I was fortunate. When I went out to start hiring other teachers, what I basically decided was that I wasn't going to hire like the colleges hire, that I wasn't going to look for PhDs, that I was going to look for people who were actively working in the industry, who were actual screenwriters, not theorists, not brilliant critics, not reverse engineering people who were out there doing it right now. And I was fortunate to find some of those people. And then over the years, some of the students working with me grew to a point where they became professional writers, and I was able to hire them. And so what we've really been able to build that I love is a philosophy. And there are basically 2 aspects to it. Aspect number 1 is, that screenwriting is a craft, but it's also an art. And that if you don't teach the art, it doesn't matter how good the craft is. And that, well, a lot of people say, you either have talent or you don't. I think that that's just the craziest thing I've ever heard. I think that what we call talent is actually voice. And everybody has a voice. The problem is that most of us are not trained in how to connect to our voice or how to get our voice on the page. So the first thing we do differently is, before we teach craft, and we do teach craft, but before we teach craft, we make sure that we're teaching the art. We're teaching people to connect subconsciously to their writing, to build things organically, to connect to their voice, the thing that's going to allow their work to stand out. And then we help them shape it through craft. So you're applying the tool to the art rather than trying to make the art fit into the tool. So that's the first aspect of what we do. And an aspect of what we do that we were lucky to be able to do as we grew was, I had a big problem with the grad schools, because I felt like it's very hard to be a screenwriter if you have $300,000 of debt. And I was watching these students, to say it bluntly, to get ripped off, where, they were spending 300 grand learning from academics who were brilliant critics, but didn't necessarily know how to write a screenplay. And then, what was really depressing was that when they graduated was when they actually needed mentorship, right? Not during the magical period where they didn't need a job and were just, in magical heaven writing land, but when they graduated and suddenly they had to balance writing with a job to pay off their debt, and when they're trying to break into the industry and they're getting notes and they're not knowing how to deal with them, and suddenly they had no mentorship at that point. And so what we tried to do, we built a program called ProTrack, and that basically turns the grad school model inside out. So instead of 2 years of heaven, you get a lifetime of mentorship, a career-long mentorship, where at a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the cost. So, for example, one of the people I was lucky enough to be able to hire is a guy named Steve Moulton. Steve is a working screenwriter. He is a Pulitzer Prize nominee. He's a former HBO and Showtime executive. He teaches at Columbia Grad School, where people spend $60,000 a year to study with him in a group. And at our school, people can study with him for $450 a session, one-on-one. So, and if people can't afford that, we have teachers who are less famous, but equally talented and much less expensive than Steve. So the idea is to basically give students a lifelong mentorship. You can start as a little baby writer or anywhere you happen to be on your career path. You have someone who's going to meet with you every week or every other week, read every page you write, read each draft as you complete it. And, at the beginning, you might be working on what's the character, and, 4 years later, you might be working on, I'm on a Netflix show and the showrunner says this and Netflix says that, and they're not in agreement. And what do I do? But the idea is to have that mentorship that really lasts you through your life.
So I know, of course, you write your screenplay, and then also you teach now writing your TV series. But I wanted to ask you personally, do you have a preferred medium to write in, whether that's TV or film or play? Because, of course, they all have their own limitation. With TV, for instance, with a 3-act structure. And, so I'm just curious for you personally, if you have a preference.
Yeah. So, I always feel like the project tells me what it wants to be. So, unless I'm working on a for-hire project, in which case my preferred medium is whatever the producer wants. But left to my own devices, I don't try to tell the project what I want it to be. And part of that is, I spent so much of my career making other people happy. And I kind of learned that that's not very satisfying for me, that when it comes to my art, I want my art to be art first. And then I worry about how am I going to get financing? How am I going to get money behind it? So at this point in my career, I'm mostly working on a book about screenwriting called Think Like a Writer, which is honestly, it's a journey for me because I have not written a book before. So I'm learning, but it's exciting because I'm trying to figure out how to do something that when I do my classes are very much interactive. So the lectures are growing out of the work that the students are doing, and that keeps it from being another formula. And so, the challenge that I'm trying to figure out in the book is how do you codify those ideas into a book when you don't know where the reader is in their project? How do you codify that into a thought process so that the writer doesn't just end up turning it into another formula for themselves, because formulas kill voice and not having voice kills careers. So, I write plays, but I also write movies. Right now, if I was beginning my career, if I was just trying to break in, I would probably be most interested in writing television. And that's just because there's such incredible demand, but there's also the type of content you can create on television right now is so interesting. Whereas when I was coming up, television was where writers went to die. It wasn't where the really interesting writing was. When I was coming up, the interesting writing was in features. And so, I think if you're at the beginning of your career, you want to be watching everything, and you want to be asking yourself, what kinds of projects do I want to be working on? And then you want to be listening to the project and go, that this piece might just be saying, hey, I know you want to write a movie, but I'm a TV show, and it will tell you, and then it's at your peril that you don't listen because the script wants to be what it wants to be.
And so then I know in your Write Your Screenplay class that you talk about me draft, audience draft, producer draft, reader draft, but that really though, the whole point, like when you're starting, that was to just give yourself the opportunity to discover and explore and play, and how essential that is to just figuring out the story, basically. So, and then how you talk about how with the script, always focusing on action, of course, and the characters want. So would you say that it's more essential to start, I guess it's different for everyone, starting with character or starting with plot? Like, what's your opinion on that in particular?
I always feel like, the screenwriting gods speak to you. And sometimes they are kind and sometimes they are cryptic, right? And so if the screenwriting gods are kind, they're going to be like, here, Allie, here's the entire script that you want to write, beginning, middle, and end. Here's the hook. Here's the character. And all you have to do is be the scribe and write it down. And sometimes it happens like that. And then other times the screenwriting gods are like, here's this image you just can't get out of your head, and I'm not going to tell you anything else. Or here are some plot points. I don't know why they matter, but I have them in my head. Or because I'm particularly fascinated with process, and I always have been. So, sometimes for me, my project actually just comes out of like a challenge where for years, I was just trying to figure out how to write a movie with two main characters on opposite sides of the same war, where both characters are right. And that was more just a reaction to two things. Number one, I just didn't like the hero paradigm that like there's a good guy and a bad guy. I think we're seeing that, in our politics right now, the incredibly negative results of demonizing the enemy, but I was just interested in dialogue, right? I was interested in, the Hegelian idea, the philosophical idea of like not trying to hold on to your beliefs, but instead of trying to attack your beliefs in order to get closer to the truth. And so and then as a process person, I was like, no one's doing this. I want to figure out how to do this, and it's hard. And I can write something simple quite easily. I want to do something really hard that I don't exactly know how to do. And the truth is, I wrote a lot of bad scripts trying to do that. And I didn't get it right until I wrote the Matthew Shepard story, and I finally kind of figured it out. But the inspiration can come from anywhere. And then the trick is, how do you? So you want to think you have two parts of your mind, right? You have your conscious mind, which I call the editing brain, and then you have the subconscious mind, which I call the writing brain. And the editing brain is like the parent, right? It has plans, it has concerns, it has fears. It wants to make sure that the script turns out and that you can sell it and that you're going to make money and that you're not wasting your time and that other people are going to get it and it's going to be good and it's going to say this and it's going to be clear and people, right? All these editing brain thoughts. And then your writing brain is like a child, right? Your writing brain is like, I want to go play, and the truth is, writing is play. All art is play. And your writing brain, your subconscious mind, is really good at art, right? Just like all children are artists, right? Because your writing brain doesn't have the filter and all the concerns and fears of your conscious mind, right? It can just be itself. And this is why, little Mikey doesn't worry about his Matchbox Cars story arc, or whether My Little Pony is having, a proper catharsis, right? The kids just play. And, what happens as we get older is that we partly because our education system was designed by Henry Ford, right? It was designed to make you a really good cog in a machine, not to make you an independent thinker. And so all of the teaching at so many actually quite fine universities and quite fine books, but all of the teaching goes towards the conscious mind, right? And then what ends up happening is the subconscious mind ends up in this really negative parental relationship, right? Where the conscious mind is either an abusive parent, right? Like the things that we say to our little baby writer brain, if you said them to a real child, social services would be coming. And so, or we end up with the helicopter parenting of our, no. Oh, no. Remember what this teacher said? No. Oh, that's not 3x structure. No. Oh, hold on. What? You're trying to get to this plot point. This doesn't have anything to do with that plot point. What's wrong with you? Right? We end up with this helicopter parent. And what ends up happening is the one of two kinds of writer's block, right? And the first kind is actually the easier kind to deal with. It's the kind where people aren't writing. And it's a very easy kind of writer's block to deal with. I can fix that in a day, right? Because at least the writer is aware that they're blocked, right? They're aware that there's a problem, and that means that they're open to trying something new and getting I can get a writer unblocked in one session. That kind of writer's block is easy to deal with. But the second kind of writer's block, so the writer's block where the little child is just like, I don't want to play with you. That's easy to fix, because the truth is the child wants to play, and you just have to create a safe environment for the child to do so. The second kind of block is actually much more challenging because the writer's often not aware that they're blocked. The second kind of block is where the writing is good but flat, where they're executing all the rules, all the formula, everything's clear, but you read it and you just don't care. You read it and the dialogue is flat, the characters are flat, they're clear, they have all the characteristics that should make them a compelling character, but the characteristics aren't held together by that glue, right? And usually the cause of that is that the writer is doing all this conscious mind editing stuff before they let the child play. So what we try to do at the school is to teach the skills so that first we can empower the child to play. And by the way, that's a rigorous process. That's not free writing. You alluded to the me draft before, which is something that I teach in my write your screenplay class. Mm-hmm. And the me draft is not free writing, right? It's not sing kumbaya and just write whatever's on your mind. It's not the vomit draft. It's none of that. It's actually a very rigorous process that is designed to tear through the censorship of your inner censor, right? And to actually train your subconscious mind how to see, feel, hear, and connect what they're seeing, feeling, and hearing onto the page. And it's built on improv techniques. And, not all of these techniques come from me. Improv, hypnosis, which I learned from my mom. My mom's a hypnotherapist, and she really is the person who taught me most of what actually ended up serving my career. Acting concepts, philosophical concepts, psychological concepts. So there, and exercises. And so there's a really rigorous process in getting first the something on the page that you have actually seen every moment. There's something wonderful and surprising. You've looked to find those things that only you could see, hear, or feel, and you've connected them on the page, where every moment has something special to you. Every moment feels truthful to you. Every moment has something disruptive about it because of its truth, right? We work on that first. And then what we do is we then start to apply craft through those other 3 drafts that you brought up, the audience draft, the producer draft, and the reader draft. Kind of focus the conscious editing brain, so the conscious editing brain isn't trying to juggle 50 balls all at one time, so that instead you're like, here is one ball that you have to focus on. All you have to focus is on, even in the me draft, okay, conscious mind, just focus on this one idea so that you don't overwhelm the child, so the child can still do the writing, but so that if the kid's about to run out in the street, you know how to point them back in the right direction. And what we're trying to build is eventually we get to a point where it's more like a dance, right? Where you have just the right amount of pressure between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, so that the conscious mind moves, the subconscious mind reacts. The subconscious mind moves, the the conscious mind reacts. And that's ultimately what we're building. That's what a balanced artist looks like. That's what an artist who's completely in control of their gifts, who can write when the inspiration is there or when the inspiration is not, who can write the passion project and then get the right for hire project and write it from just as connected of a place. That's ultimately what we're trying to build for our writers.
And you've touched on, of course, how as writers, it's so relatable, like with our own inner self-critic, and that how we go through this process of, I hate my writing, like I hate this script. Like, how do you even start with just chipping away at the negative self-talk and like kind of breaking that habit of, well, let me allow myself to write this crappy draft first. Like, let me,
So that's a very big question. And the truth is there's not one answer to it, but trying to stop the negative self-talk is almost impossible. And what it does is it just puts your focus back on the negative self-talk, right? So if you're like, I have to stop negative self-talking. God, you suck. You're negative self-talking. Oh my God, you just did it again. Now you're criticizing yourself for negative self-talking. God, do you suck, right? These are actually concepts, again, these concepts are thousands of years old. These are Buddhist concepts, right? The concept of the monkey mind, right? And that all of that chatter is just chatter. Right. And actually one of the first steps is to recognize that it doesn't matter. That the chatter actually doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter if your mind is saying good things or bad things, because honestly, the mind that says, oh my God, you're so great, you're so talented, you're so gifted, everything you write is great. Well, that's going to mess you up too, like that has the danger of turning you into a pretentious artist, an artist who thinks who doesn't do the work. And you see this actually with a lot of really gifted artists who they start off and their work is so extraordinary. And then, they make it and their work after that is flat. And often that's just a result of too much positive self-talk. So what we're trying to do is actually go, all this self-talk is just all baloney, right? None of it matters. We're terrible evaluators of our own work, especially early in our careers. And so the first thing that we try to do, there's an exercise I do in my Write Your Screenplay class called the bad screenplay exercise, which is a kind of amazing way of kind of breaking through all that chatter. But I always have the person who thinks they wrote the worst scene in the class raise their hand, and they read the scene aloud, and invariably the scene is incredible. Sometimes it's like you could just shoot it and win Sundance, and then other times it's like, well, it's a mess, but look at this line, look at that moment, look at the right. And it's always the student who thinks they've written the worst scene that's actually written something incredible. And I do that exercise to kind of show students that and I've had professional writers do this exercise too, and it shows you that your evaluation of your own script, especially in the moment, is not likely to be accurate. And so I don't really quite care very much if your talk is positive or negative. And similarly, I don't care if your feedback is positive or negative, because most of your feedback's coming from coverage readers. I had a student, Sujay Pandey, many years ago, who his first 3 pieces of coverage on his script were, he called me and he was like, I don't know what to do. I've been working on the script for so long. I got 3 different pieces of coverage, and it's not that they're critical. That's not why I'm upset. It's that none of them agree with each other. They're all saying things that if one is true, the other can't be true, right? And we looked at those 3 pieces of coverage, and literally not one of them there was not one point of overlap in the criticism. And we just kept sending the script out. He ended up winning the Canada International Film Festival with that script. That got savaged in the first 3 pieces of coverage that he got. So even the notes that you get in coverage, you can't take them too seriously, because they're often written by people who don't have the experience to evaluate a script. So what we try to do first is just take all that monkey mind chatter and just go, none of this matters. And then what we try to do, and this is the harder part, but the more valuable part, is to actually retrain what are the questions you ask yourself to evaluate your script, so that you can actually understand what you're building and if you're building it or not. And, if you listen to my podcast, you know that I instead of talking about what's good or what's bad about a movie, we talk about, what you can learn from it. And it's the same kind of idea is if we're going to give ourselves feedback, we have to get away from what's good or what's bad. Because as soon as that judgment part comes in, it just really depends on how triggered you are and how insecure you are. And it's usually going to just result in either unhelpful negative feedback or unhelpful positive feedback. For example, if I were to say to you, well, who's the main character and what does she want? Right? And you go, wow, that's a really hard question to answer. Okay, well, now you actually know how to make your script clearer, right? And then if we went, well, okay, great, we don't know what she wants. Well, oh my God, I don't know what she wants. Negative self-talk. Well, screw that. Don't worry about that. What are the moments in your script where it looks like you know what she wants? Well, this moment right here, there's just this one little moment right here where I feel like she wants this. Great. That's one of those me droppings I was talking to you about earlier. So we'll take that moment, we'll learn how to identify it, and then we go, okay, if this one thing is true, then what else is true? Then what can we build? Then what does that tell us about where the script needs to go? And so that's how we kind of refocus what is just either a tearing up, a false tearing down, or a false building up. And we refocus it into really learning how to evaluate your own scripts. And then, of course, in our ProTrack program, one of the reasons that our students are so successful in that program is that you have someone who's brilliant, who's been doing this for years and years and years, who can do that with you so that you don't have to do it in a vacuum.
And so I wanted to ask you also about, in particular, the whole thing with show, don't tell, because that's such like a, we always hear about that, of course. So I just want to know for you, what does that mean to you? And like, where do you start with showing and telling and, to make the script, in a sense, more compelling, I guess?
Yeah, probably about 10 years ago, I did a podcast on this. It's another book I'm working on that I kind of in the back burner right now while I work on Think Like a Writer, but I'm working on a book called 100 Rules and How to Break Them. And I was posting some of the examples years ago to my podcast. And one of the rules was show, don't tell. And my belief is whatever rule you find, I can find you some example of somebody who's broken that rule in a brilliant way. And I think that show, don't tell is one of those, it's like a good thing to think about, but it's not always right. Sometimes you have to tell, I'm thinking about like that moment in Beast of the Southern Wild, where she says, not my daddy, and that's the moment where I cry, but that's a classic telling moment. Like she's literally telling what she feels at that moment, right? It is 100% wrong. Not my daddy. She doesn't want to think that her daddy's going to die, and it is devastating. It's a devastating moment. And if you ripped that moment out of that script, then you would be in a lot of trouble. So instead of thinking so rigidly, oh my God, show, don't tell, what I actually think, and this is drawn from a guy named Augusto Boal, who is a brilliant theater director, and not just a theater director, but he was an activist. He did a kind of theater called Theater of the Oppressed, and his belief was that you could use theater to help people find their own answers, right, to socio-political problems. And he said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically the fundamental problem of all life is that people don't see what they look at, don't listen to what they hear, and don't feel what they experience. And usually what it manifests as a show, don't tell note, the real problem is usually that the writer isn't doing one of those three things. They're not actually seeing what they are looking at. They're seeing a laptop. I'm looking at my laptop right now, and I'm noticing that the N on my keyboard is actually, it's worn out. I can't actually see the N. Now, if I hadn't looked at it, I wouldn't notice that, right? If I just glanced at it without really looking, I'm just going to see a laptop. I'm going to see a cliche of a laptop. right? But if I look closely, I will always find something that surprises me, because everything in the world is surprising. There's nothing normal in the entire universe. And so I look closely, and this is one of my tricks is, I'll look closely at the image I'm writing. And if I've written an image that looks like I didn't really see it, then I'll look more closely until I see something that surprises me. If I'm writing a line of dialogue that seems like a telling line, I'll listen more closely until I hear something that I didn't anticipate, right? And then I know that's the real line. And if the writing feels disconnected in some way, which is usually, this kind of goes to the question of like, why show don't tell? But really, both are wrong, because both put you in the position of the person who is demonstrating something for the audience, right? So show whom? Show the audience. Tell whom? Tell the audience. And there's nothing wrong with the audience. We talk about the audience draft as the second phase that we go through in writing. But what happens to almost all writers when they think about the audience too early is that I got a joke, if you've ever been on a date with someone who's hotter than you, you kind of know what it's like to be thinking about the audience, right? Is like suddenly you're the weird person with the arms and you're saying things that you would never say because you're thinking about like, how do I make them like me? Or how do I show them how great I am? Or how do I tell them how great I am? Right? You're thinking about them rather than just being in the moment, being present and being curious and connecting. And so usually both showing and telling are usually wrong in early phases. In early phases, I want to see, hear, and feel. And then I want to make sure that I'm capturing what I see, hear, and feel as truthfully as I can, not to show or tell anyone, but for me, right? For me and my character. Am I seeing the world through my character's eyes? Am I writing what my character sees, hears, and feels? Am I writing what I see, hear, and feel as I watch my character on their journey? Is it truthful? Is every line I've written truthful? That's where I'm going to start. Only once I've gone through that, then I'm going to ask myself, is there anything that's not clear? That's the audience draft, right? Often you'll realize, no, actually, just by dropping the audience into the character's perspective, everything is clear. Other times you'll go, oh, actually, it's still not clear. Okay, so the audience, what's the one thing the audience needs to understand? Not the 50 things they need to understand, because they won't understand 50 things. 50 things will just go over their head, right? What's the one thing they need to understand? Okay, how do I get that in? And then I'll ask myself, I'd rather get it in by showing than by telling, but I might have to tell. And then if I tell, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go back to the me draft. I'm going to go back to the character and go, okay, they happen to say this line because it's necessary to know that, the key is hidden underneath the doorstep. But it doesn't matter if I show the key under the doorstep or tell the friend that the key's under the doorstep. It's still boring exposition. So now I'm going to go back into the character. I'm going to go, well, what's underneath that line? Like what makes them want to say that or do that, right? And I might realize that, oh, my character has obsessive compulsive disorder. And she's always checking to make sure the key is there. And then she checks under the doormat to make sure that there are no pine needles. And then she checks the screen door to make sure that the weather stripping is in place, right? And now that thing that felt like it was just indicating something for the audience has shown me something about the character. And ideally, I don't even judge her obsessive compulsive disorder. I just notice that she does these things. And now it doesn't feel like showing or telling. It's just the character living their life. Or I might take the line, oh, the key's under the, and I might think, well, what's driving her to say that line? And I might realize that she's seducing, right? And that gives that line some interest because now it's not me trying to make her say the line to show or tell the audience something. It is her using that line to seduce somebody. Or I might find that she's using the same line to threaten somebody. Or I might find that she's using the same line to shame somebody. right? And so these are acting concepts from Stanislavski, right? But making sure that there's an objective underneath the line, just like an actor would do. So I'm throwing a lot of ideas at you, but the concept is, if you're thinking about the audience too early, your writing is likely going to suck. Unless you are a pro who has done your 10,000 hours and are so finely in touch with your instrument that you can juggle lots of balls at the same time. Even most of the professional writers I work with, they can't do that, right? Most of the people come to me when they're having a hard time, especially the professionals, right? They come when it's like, I'm stuck on this. This isn't working. And almost always what's making it not working is they're thinking about the audience, or they're thinking about the producer before they're seeing, hearing, feeling, connecting to the character.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you've alluded to this, basically how a mistake is early on trying to get it right. Like if it's you're writing a comedy, trying to make it funny, trying to make the characters interesting and relatable, and high stakes with the conflict, all of these things that go into it. Obviously with rewriting, we go through multiple drafts. So how do you essentially maintain the excitement of what got you excited about the idea in the first place, like the passion behind the idea? Because sometimes that can be difficult when you're like kind of sick of the story in a way, sick of the characters. So basically just kind of maintaining inspiration.
Wow, that's such a great question, Allison. That for me, I don't actually worry about that as much. And maybe that's because I know that almost every project I've ever written, there's been a period where I've been disillusioned with it. Like almost every project, you kind of reach that point where you're like, why am I writing this stupid project? Man, this project sucks. I had so many other good ideas. Why am I writing this bad idea? My God, I feel no passion for this anymore. Ugh. I feel that way on almost everything I write. It's like I just know that that's part of the process that I'm going to go through. And I know that on the other side of that, the passion comes back. So I know that once I get through all that self-doubt and figure out, okay, it doesn't matter if I lose passion. I still have to make this great. Just like if I was working for a producer, even if that's like, congratulations, you're writing the Hungry Hungry Hippos movie. Well, I don't freaking care. The Hungry Hungry Hippos movie that I write is going to be the most beautiful story I can ever write, but so I know it's just likely that I'm going to go through those periods where I don't feel passionate. And for me, it's more about showing up and going, okay, I don't care that it's bad. I don't care that I'm not connected. I don't care that I don't want to do this. I'm a writer. It is my job to make this beautiful. So despite the fact that it happens to not be beautiful right now, how do I make it beautiful? And then one of the places that I think about that is theme. I have a belief, and this is easier, by the way, when you're at the beginning of your career than when you're working for hire. When you're working for hire, it's very challenging. Or when you're on a TV show, it's very challenging because there's somebody else coming to you. And I can just show you, Allison, would you like $100,000 to write a movie?
Of course.
Yes. And notice you didn't ask me what it's about.
Yeah.
Right? And that's until you're famous, until you're getting multiple offers, that's just the way it is. And even then, oftentimes, well, what's it about? Well, it's about I get to work with Martin Scorsese. It's not about what's the it's about my agent is telling me if I don't do this, I'm an idiot, right? And so it's harder when you're working for other people. So it's good to really learn this in your own process. Is if you start by writing something that you want to write, and that doesn't mean it's great. It honestly doesn't matter. Whatever you happen to want to write. I have this idea stuck in my head. I have this question I don't know the answer to. I have this character I've been interested in exploring. There's this world that I want to explore. Anything, as long as you start with something that you have some interest in, and as long as you trust your instincts as you write, as long as you allow yourself to do that me draft, right, and force yourself to do that and see, hear, and feel things, eventually you're going to realize what you're really writing about. And it's often different than what you thought you were writing about. It's kind of like therapy. You show up and you're like, oh, there's just this weird one little tiny, not a really big deal thing that I'm here for. I don't even know why I'm here, but maybe I'm here for a reason, right? And then after a little bit of therapy, you realize, oh, oh, it's about that. And then a little bit more therapy, you go, oh, it's about that. And a little more therapy, you go, oh, it's about my mother, right? And this little tip of the iceberg that we see is actually representative of a huge iceberg. And so my belief is what you do is you start by looking at the tips of the iceberg that you know are true, the pieces that you can see that you know relate to what you want to say, those me droppings again. And then you start to ask yourself, what is the idea that ties together, as best I can say it, all these me droppings? And that's your theme, right? And that doesn't mean you got the theme right yet. There are 50 layers of that iceberg that you're not even aware of yet, right? But then you go, okay, well, I know this is important to me because if it wasn't, I wouldn't be writing this, right? So there's something super important to me about this. I got to keep writing until I understand why this matters. I got to keep writing until I understand what journey the character goes in relation to this question, because that's where my ultimate passion is going to lie.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, Jake, this has been absolutely wonderful. I can't thank you enough. So as we're wrapping up now, I just want to know if you have like any movie or show recommendations, whether things that you love, like your all-time favorites or just anything recently that you've watched that you care to recommend.
There are so many great things.
Yeah.
If you're writing television, start by watching The Wire. The Wire is probably the best TV show ever written. And you will learn so much about engine by watching The Wire. You will learn so much about TV writing. You'll learn so much about, like, it's not even important to understand what people are saying in order to have dialogue work. You'll learn so much about engine by watching The Wire. So I could not recommend a show more highly than The Wire. You really want to be watching everything. You know, of movies I love to teach. I love to teach There Will Be Blood. I love to teach The Big Lebowski. I love to teach Winter's Bone. I love to teach Little Miss Sunshine. I love to teach American Beauty. I love to teach The Wrestler. But there are hundreds of movies I love to teach. You know, what I would say is watch everything, and particularly push yourself to watch things that are not in your genre. Watch movies that you don't like. Watch bad movies. Watch bad TV shows. And ask yourself, if this was an early draft, what would the writer be going for? What do I think they were trying to do? And how could I help them achieve that? And that will help you start to learn how to give notes. It's a lot easier to understand it on somebody else's project. So take the judgment out. Don't go, this is a bad script. Go, oh, it's an early draft. Oh, interesting. Look, they were building this beautiful thing, but they lost track of it and they built this instead. So I think that would be my recommendation, is literally, you get the best job in the world. You get to spend your time watching movies and television as your work, right? That's incredible and exciting. So watch everything you possibly can.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So please, Jake, let everyone know about Jacob Krueger Studio and, of course, your podcast and the classes. So much stuff, so much great stuff.
Absolutely. So my website is writeyourscreenplay.com, and you can find the podcast there. Every Thursday night, we have a free class called Quarantinis, where we raise a virtual glass together. It's 100% free. If you can make a donation, we match the donation and use it to offset costs for our students who have been affected by the crisis. And you'll learn a different lesson about screenwriting every Thursday. Really awesome, fun experience. I teach Write Your Screenplay and Write Your TV series. I also have more advanced classes. We have Pro Track. We have so many different things. But if you're interested in learning how to study with us, you can reach out. Our admissions director will talk to you for free and help you figure out a program that works for you. And if you've been affected by the crisis and you need a scholarship, you let us know, and we do have scholarship funds available that can help people offset the cost of classes if you've been affected by the crisis. So that's writeyourscreenplay.com.
And with that, that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. As always, you can follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Be sure to check out storytellingsaga.com, and feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, I will be interviewing TV writer and producer Shauna McGarry. Some of her credits include Bajillion Dollar Properties, Tuca and Birdie, and BoJack Horseman. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.